Pause It podcast. I am Dr. Sam, and with me, I have a special guest. Normally, I have Dr. Robert with me, but today, as you can see, I do not. So I have Dr. Vincent Michels with me today from Just Food for Dogs, which I am very excited. You don't know how excited we are. When we first started doing our discussions about wanting to do some informational podcasts about food, I was really, really, really interested in trying to make sure that we got representation from the fresh food side of things because so many people are asking me about it every day. And they want to know, is it better? What's the difference? All that sort of stuff. And so I really feel like having somebody come in that works there, lives and breathes it every day, is going to do a much better job of explaining things than me. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. My first podcast, by the way, which is exciting. So yeah, I don't
Oh,
have as
yay.
cool mic as you though. So I had to invest in one of those by doing more of this. But I hope you can hear me okay.
I can hear you just fine. And actually, the only reason I have this mic is because my husband has been doing a podcast for almost 4 years. And so he's had this. And so when we decided to do this, I was like, hey, I'm going to just use your setup and,
So you
you know,
pay for it. That's good to know. Yeah, I should do
yeah,
that too. I should see if my wife can invest in some of that, or I'll just steal it for these things.
exactly. Use it together. So now we get both of us do our podcast in our little guest room downstairs. That's become our little podcast studio. So
Very nice.
yeah. So if you don't mind just kind of telling the listeners just like a little bit about yourself, your background. I always think it's great when food companies have veterinarians on staff. So it's nice to know just a little bit of like how you got here and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, Dr. Vincent Michels, you can call me Vince, obviously. But I am a veterinary nutritionist, so I'm a veterinarian. I trained at Virginia Tech, and once I graduated, I did a lot of normal things people do. So I went and did a rotating internship, and then I practiced for a little while. So I practiced in emergency medicine outside of DC, and then I've always really loved nutrition. Nutrition is, I would not say it's the most competitive specialty out there for vet med, but there's not a lot of spots every year.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on getting a residency and finally got one in 2020. So right during the middle of the pandemic. I did my residency, and when I was done with my additional training, to be a specialist in veterinary nutrition, I joined Just Food for Dogs. And so I joined the company in October of 2022 after my residency, and I've been really enjoying it. So in terms of just kind of a little bit of background, I guess, of like, you're okay if I jump into what we do, Just Food for
I would
Dogs?
love it. I think it's great. I'm also curious how long, because I am so hyper aware of Just Food for Dogs
Good.
lately in the last year, but I'm curious how long you guys have
It's
been
been around.
around and yeah.
Yeah. Just River Dog has been around for quite a while. It definitely predates me, that's for sure. Just River Dog started in, I believe, 2010. It might have
Oh,
been like 2010 to 2011.
okay.
And it started in Southern California. So the company was originally a much smaller enterprise. So it was like locally produced kitchens in Southern California. And then it has gradually expanded to the point where we now have definitely a lot larger facilities where we make our food that are all over the country. So we have plants in Chicago and a couple of different spots around the country, as well as Southern California. We are a whole food, human grade diet, meaning whole food, meaning it's, these are ingredients that you could buy and use in the human food chain. So things like ground chicken, like ground dark meat chicken, white rice, brown rice, quinoa, sweet potatoes. And all of our ingredients have to meet human grade standard. That is a little bit complicated, but the short of it is basically from the quality of the material and the way it's handled, shipped, and sold, it has to be able to meet the standards set by FDA and USDA. So that's what it kind of means from like a regulatory perspective for calling something human grade. And that goes from the food items all the way through the supplements and packaging. And the facilities themselves. So basically, like every plant that we make our food in could make human food. And some of them used to,
Wow.
where the space used to be used to make food that is sold in the human supply chain.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So when you were looking for a place to land,
Yes.
was it more sort of happenstance or was that like your goal? Does that make sense? Like I know
Well,
that's a hard
yeah.
question, but sometimes life leads us that way or like we shoot for that. So I guess I'm curious.
Yeah. I would say that I didn't set off with the intention of going into industry when I did
Okay.
my residency. By training, I'm a clinician. So when I was out in practice, I did emergency med for a little while. And then in residency, you do clinical nutrition. So you work with patients. You're not necessarily working with, like a pet food industrial space.
Right.
The reason that Just for Dogs really attracted me is that when I was doing my residency, I trained at University of Tennessee. And
Mm-hmm.
so my mentors in that program are, I don't know if famous is the right word because it's a very small field, but we do a lot of homemade diets at University of Tennessee.
Right.
So it's basically making a whole food diet, and it's a very similar conceptual job where basically you're taking the needs of, in that case, a patient, a dog or a cat who's coming to you for a particular need, and you're designing a diet for them with whole food ingredients. That was a significant part of our caseload, and that was really focused toward mostly clinical stuff. So dominantly chronic GI, so inflammatory bowel disease and its various forms, and then a lot of kidney and stone diets. Although
Mm,
there was definitely like quite a diverse case stuff that we had there. When I left residency, like I love doing that. And there's kind of a decision you have to make about the scale in which you're going to be working. So in this case, like when I ended up having, I'd like to go for more of a macro level, intervention, meaning like,
right.
when you work for a company like Just for Dogs, you're able to reach a lot bigger population than you would if you worked in clinical practice. Obviously, you lose that like interpersonal interaction where like I used to be able to work with pets and their clients and their owners, right?
Right. Right.
And it's very intimate, and you got to see more directly a lot of the effects that you were trying to achieve, with the food for that particular pet. When you work
Mm-hmm.
for a company like this, obviously, I don't get to work one-on-one with clients anymore, but I reach a lot more of them. And while it's not exactly the same, like in kind of scaling up the production of food from a homemade diet to like industrial produced whole food diets is not the same. It's a lot
Right.
more complicated,
Right.
but it's a lot more similar to what I was doing before. Whereas, if I was going to go work in industry for like a different company, like kind of like a kibble or canned food manufacturer, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I would be doing a lot more of like scientific affairs. Whereas with my job right now, because of my training, uh, I'm able to actually help produce and design these diets that we make, these whole food products. And it's really exciting to be able to work with teams and see the food that you're designing being made and translate into, high quality and hopefully efficacious, products that are sold. And that's both, our daily diets, kind of our regular commercial products, and our veterinary diets, which are our kind of therapeutic line.
Right.
So it's a really exciting role. But yeah, I didn't really intend to go into this particular field, but
Mm-hmm.
I got a very lucky opportunity that, when the person that had this job before me was leaving, I was kind of coincided when I was looking for a job, and he used to Dr. Dan Su, who was my predecessor here at the company. When he left the company, he also trained at Tennessee, so there was a
Oh, there's good.
quite a
Yeah.
bit of institutional
Yeah.
but it was a very good segue to kind of trying to see, hey, can we how can you reach more pets than you can just working in clinical practice? So it was a very exciting opportunity for me. I've really enjoyed, kind of going from conceptual to designing the diets to seeing the product actually made and being able to adjust them and kind of refine them to the point where you can really make, the highest quality product that you're looking for, basically.
Right. When you're doing that, how does that happen? What's that process like? So is it like you're doing is it like a feed trial? Is it because there's that going right into the commercial diet itself? Because I'm just curious to know what the process looks like for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're designing a diet, and the kind of the basic steps are, we have software, which will basically you take the ingredients that, okay, we'll go back up a little bit. First is you're trying to establish what's the intention of the product you're trying to make, right? So, if you,
Hmm.
you have, obviously, when you're making a diet that is intended more for kind of like a holistic daily diet, meaning it's not for a therapeutic intent, it's meant to be just a balanced diet that appeals to an otherwise healthy population. You
Hmm.
have a lot more freedom, but then you're trying to make, like I say, a therapeutic product. So this would be something that's designed for to aid a veterinarian in management of the disease state.
Hmm.
You obviously pose a little bit more limitations, but either way, you have like kind of a brief of like, I want to create this intent of a product. And then we take the ingredients that we have. So we have a Rolodex of products we already buy. So these are things that range from just like ground beef that you could buy at a grocery store,
Hmm.
organ meats like liver, sweet potato, rice, what have you, like a very wide gamut of products. And you use those and the data that we have. So we take those diets we buy. We have testing to kind of validate like what's their general composition, so you can kind of get a better job of getting to the point where what on paper what you make hopefully matches what comes out in the actual food.
Right.
Uh, and then we make prototypes of those where we use the whole food ingredients and we use a kind of a select number of nutrient blends. So we have vitamins and minerals. You add the product like every balanced product that you make that's on the market that kind of fills in the micronutrient gaps that can't be provided by the whole foods that are on.
Hmm.
We produce it. Typically, we make kind of a various scales of products. We kind of have like a small scale initial prototyping, and then we escalate that to our main production. So you're talking about like making a 200-pound batch at the prototype stage to the kind of more advanced prototypes, which are like 4,500,
Oh, wow.
5,000-pound batches of food,
Hmm. Hmm.
to make sure that you have fidelity, which is one is like, did you get kind of the broad strokes right at a smaller scale? When you scale it up to the kind of like what would be more akin to like a normal production batch. So we kind of, in our main facilities, we can make about 4,500 pounds of food at a time for every cycle with our machines. And then you test at every stage. You send off that data to a lab, and we say, "Hey, we contract with a third-party site, and we give them samples of our food. And typically, you take kind of a couple samples from different parts of the production, and aggregate them together, and do different tests, and we validate that they can meet all of our standards. So we're for any diet that is meant for otherwise healthy pets, you trying to meet or exceed. Definitely, we try to exceed
Right.
ACO
Uh-huh.
for all the nutrient requirements. And that provides you a good buffer where, like, there's always going to be variation in any food items because, like, not every, chicken that is grown is going to be exactly the
Right,
same.
right.
And same thing with anything like rice or potato.
Hmm.
But, we get data to validate that, hey, we're meeting our goals, both for meeting the regulatory standard and our internal goals for like what will you exceed this requirement that provides the best quality product. And then after you make your food, you test it. So we have some internal kind of light testing where we feed it to some of our own employee dogs and should see like how they like it.
If they like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you did like it. And usually that's not a hard sell. But and then we also do things like digestibility testing. So for any like
Right.
new products, they're kind of in a paradigm that we're not used to. We would send it off and get basically you feed it to dogs, you collect their poop, and you get data, which is very fun.
Yeah.
It's very yeah, it's lovely stuff. But it does work. So you basically see like how digestible is the food? Does it have a good margin of safety for what you're trying to achieve?
Hmm.
Um, you know, and after you do all of those steps, if you kind of meets all of our standards, we release it to the market.
Okay.
So it is an evolved process. It's I think that it's a lot more work than people think it is.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's fun. Now I love getting to like design something and then it go all the way to like, okay, it's being fed to a dog. It's pretty exciting stuff for
That's very
dailies.
cool. How long is that process? Like, is it a year?
But
2 years?
it depends. I would say it depends on the nature of the project. So if you're starting with, for instance, like let's say that with every product you make, you have to keep maintaining it. So like if when you design a product, it starts off a certain way, and nutrients shift and change over time, and so you
Right.
have to kind of like rein them in. A project like that's not going to take as long. I would say maybe like 6 months to kind of make sure that you're kind of saying, hey, we're going to like renovate an existing product to kind of make
Hmm.
sure it's meeting our standards and it's not drifting too far off the mark. Maybe like 3 to 6 months. For some of these bigger projects, I would say like 6 months to a year, or more realistic for the length of time it would take to go from design to through testing and implementation, and then obviously release. Because once you kind of have your product made and like oh we like this, you have to have all the other correspondings go along with it. So you have to have training materials, marketing materials. It's way beyond my field of expertise, but
You're like, that part I don't know.
yeah, it's like I help them with that. I'm like, I can tell you stuff, but I can't make you.
Right.
Definitely did not miss my calling for graphic design, that's for sure. But it's a very involved process, so it does take quite a while to kind of get from design to sale of a different diet.
Well, yeah, and I would think like it is so it's amazing to hear everything and then put together also all the education and the training that took you to a place where you could even do that to begin with. And to think about how many times I will have to have the conversation with an owner like yeah, I know that they won't eat whatever kibble you're trying to give them, so you're just feeding them chicken and that's all they're eating, but like I you need to understand that that's not balanced and complete. And so now we need to figure out a way to help your dog who's just never going to consume dog food according to you. And here are our choices. So for me to have, because then some of those people will come back, well, I don't have time to do, X, Y, or Z thing. And it's like, I'm just going to make them chicken. And it's like, okay, well, if you can't do this and you can't do that, it's like, it's just great now because in the beginning of my practice, I didn't really know about like just food for
Oh,
dogs or you know what I mean? So like I didn't have a lot of resources to be able to say, well, you don't have to feed them that. You don't, you know what I mean? This is it. This is what you can do. This is a great choice to do. And more, I think people are really realizing the importance of really good nutrition. And so I feel like having something that is so well formulated and thoughtful and studied and based in, true science, is just, I'm very thankful for it, truthfully.
well, I appreciate that. I definitely really like the kind of combination of like veterinary science and food science that you have to do to kind of create good quality products. And it's definitely, I say this as if like I'm not the only person involved. Like we have a very large apparatus of people that help with
Mm-hmm.
this. So, yeah, we have product innovation teams, we have quality assurance, we have people that are operationally managing how you make the food. We have engineers. There's a lot of people that go into making quality food. Like I kind of would think of myself more as like architect and advisor, but there's a lot of people involved in the chain of building this food. The same thing you think like building a building. It's like yeah, you have your blueprint and your architectural design, but you have to work with a big team to actually create the thing that you're trying to make. So and I I'm excited that like this is this field that's growing. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of I would say that yes, obviously we're a lot smaller than the cancer and kibble space, just because that's a very conventional paradigm.
Right.
And there's difference obviously in terms of the economics of you're making a human grade diet is going to be more expensive.
Right.
And then, but I think that there's a lot of potential for growth in this particular market where a lot of people are, they really do want to feed as high quality of food as they
Right.
can. And there's a lot of if you went to a nutrition conference, which I'm prone to doing,
Yep.
there's a lot of debate about what that means in terms of what's the highest quality food.
Uh-huh.
But I'm really excited to be able to kind of work in this space to provide human grade whole food diets. Um, it's definitely I think that there's going to be more of this in the future. I feel like right now the space is still pretty small, and there's definitely more competition than there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much potential in having a food that doesn't rely on it needing to be made in a can or being produced into extremely dry
Right.
pellet. It
Right.
gives you a lot of room for making quality products. So,
Yeah, I've had more than one now patient that did have a specific, condition. I'm trying to remember exactly if it was renal or if it was liver. Like one patient in particular, where the owner just would have done anything and everything. I mean, she was trying everything. This just very sweet dog that was just everything to this person, and like the dog would not eat the like therapeutic diet that was the original diet that they had been put on. And she was the one that told me, she was like, well, there is this just food for dogs that they have prescription diets. I was like, they do? Like I had no idea. There's only so much time to look into every little thing, and I didn't know. And so then I was able to look into it and be like, oh yeah, they have a veterinarian. Like it just made me feel so like, oh, okay, yes, this is real. You can do this. And
you made
it
real food. Yes,
changed.
I hope
Yeah, but
so.
it's true. But that's the thing. I mean, it takes a minute, to look into things because you just don't know. There's all these different things and a lot of food that's come out, kibble, raw, whatever it is, that are made by celebrities or like people who don't have any training in nutrition. So then as a GP, I don't, I'm jack of all trades, master of none, right? So like I only have so much time to research everything that comes across, and I take it very seriously to try to be able to do that as best as I can for my patients and my clients. And so like a lot of things are just like based in marketing. And so I'm like, I don't know if this is real or not, And then so when she brought that to me, I was like, I learn a lot from my clients. I'll tell you, I have some great ones that really look around and do research and they bring it to me. And I'm not too proud to say, hey, I didn't even know that existed, but now I'm going to learn about it.
So I had a segue. When I was on clinics, I empathize. Like when I would do diet, we did diet history as part of any nutrition consultation. And I would find a new food on like every day. And it's like, it seems like that's usually run out of options. It's
Yeah.
like there's this there's a food, I don't know if you've ever seen it, that was made by the guy that used to play Robin on the old Batman, like the POW, like boom, POW.
Yeah. No, I
Like,
did not know that.
I looked at the bag, I was like, oh wow, like I didn't know that that was a thing. And like you every day you find a new one. And it's challenging to keep up with like all of the products on the market, especially when you're in practice. Like there's always something new popping up, and that if you would spend all of your time validating which companies like are reputable, it would take all of your time. Like you would need
Right.
like an R&D team just to go out and find out like a
Yeah.
list of foods that were appropriate.
Right. Yeah, so I think you sort of have an arsenal after a while where you're like, okay, well, if you feel really strongly, like I always tell people, I'm like, well, what's your goal? Like, what's the thing that makes you feel good about how you're feeding your dog? Is it convenience? Is it price? Is it whole foods? Is it holistic? Is it raw? What is it? Like, I need to know. And then I sort of have my little, like, okay, well, I know that this one is okay and that one's okay and that one's okay, and then I can say, okay, well, then let's just like, this will fit your, but then people still bring me, hey, what about this guy? And I'm like, oh, I don't know what
I
that one
don't
is.
know. I don't know. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I always kind of joke that when people ask you for recommendations about food when you're in practice, it feels like you're recommending BMW, Audi, and Mercedes. Doesn't mean there's
Yeah.
not other good cars out there. Just like
Right.
I know those are good cars.
Right.
Like you may not like a German car, but at least I know that they're good. It
Right.
feels like that where it's like there's probably plenty of foods out there that are they meet the needs of the client, but it it's hard to know and trust all of them without doing a lot of digging. And so yeah, I mean, selfishly, like I'm not biased at all. Like having a company that has a nutritionist on staff is really important for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's like even people with the best of intentions, like having consultants or just having somebody who actually like lives and breathes the company is a big difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That makes a
but,
lot of sense. When people have a question about how to feed their dog, so let's say they want to start feeding just food for dogs, can they
yeah,
call and like ask questions and get any sort of advice about their dog?
yeah, we have teams that we call nutrition consultants. So these are people that they work at our retail locations and work at our various affiliates where they can help counsel clients. We also have customer services. They're part of the customer service team where they can do that.
Hmm.
We also have a calculator online, which there is no perfect recipe recommendation. Obviously, it's hard. There's kind of like you try to do the best you can and you adjust based on how the pet responds. But
Hmm.
we have an online calculator as well. Excuse me. And we have also some static feeding guides, which are what I would say my least favorite because they're the least flexible. But obviously, the standard of my standard versus what's actually useful out in the field are
Right.
slightly different. So we have a variety of tools that help people get started. And we do really encourage people to say, hey, and when you're feeding a new food, especially if you're going from a food where it's like, hey, you were feeding dry, extremely kibble, to feeding like a whole food diet, it's a very different paradigm of feeding. I think in general, people are not good at about judging how much food a dog needs. But if you can imagine like going from like 500 calories of kibble to 500 calories of like a fully hydrated food,
Yeah.
if you told somebody even like, and honestly, this would me too, like go to my fridge and pick out without looking at the back of a box, pick out 500 calories of food, I don't think I would be able to do it. And so
Uh-huh.
the same thing is kind of true for, people who are out trying to feed a new kind of product where, we try to provide them as much guidance as we can because it can be, I think, the biggest hurdle for a lot of people is how much do I feed my pet?
Yeah.
So we provide a lot of different resources to try and get them as best recommendations we can. And I would say our calculator is probably kind of the closest, but it does rely on people kind of selecting what's right for their pets. Like how active are
Yeah.
they? How much should they, you know, how much should they weigh? What should they weigh? There's like a variety of inputs you kind of put into the equation. Um, and there's still a lot of trial and error. So you can either as a company, you have to pick this is what I think you should feed, and then scale up, or you shouldn't. Some companies choose the other way, which is basically recommend a lot of food, and that way, like, oh, okay, they're definitely going to be full and fed, but they might also become rounder over time, which is the
Right,
downside.
right. Yeah.
Uh,
I do think that's probably one of the biggest battles like in GP
yeah,
is that especially in this country I feel like because like we have so many like spayed and neuters dogs, you know, they're all a little more over
well,
conditioned.
Rubenesque, yeah, yeah,
Then, you know, so I do think that like people's just perception of a healthy dog is usually a fat dog, unfortunately.
yeah.
And I usually will have to like explain to people, like, I don't actually care what the weight is, I care about the body condition. So we have this conversation all the time. I'm like, so if I can't feel their ribs at all, we're way over conditioned. We need, you know, we need to like, you know, so we have that. I try to teach people that all the time. So I'm like, you don't need a scale to know if your dog is in a good body condition. You just need to know
Yeah.
what that looks like. And but we do have a lot of people who are like telling me that their fat dog is like very finicky and won't eat anything. And I'm like,
Well, yeah, yeah. No, that's a very common thing I noticed on consultation. Yeah,
yeah. I'm like,
it's always fun. Yeah,
well,
no,
not sure how they gained a pound if they're not eating anything.
no, it's I had plenty of consults when I was in clinics where it was, oh, my dog won't eat anything, and you look at the body condition on the report, it says 7 out of 9, and you're like, huh, I don't believe you.
They're eating something.
They're eating something. Yes,
You may
it's
have
whatever.
trained them not to eat their kibble by giving them whatever it is you're giving them when they don't eat their
Yeah,
kibble, but that's totally different.
yeah, and it's. I mean, I would say that I mean, I have owned dogs where like my last dog was like an old pit bull, and I could put like his carprofen on top of his food, and this is back before I was at the company, obviously. So
Yeah,
like I was feeding kibble, and it's like, okay, well, he would eat it. He didn't care. He was like, okay, and like I could give him a steak if I wanted to, and he would finish the steak, and then he would go right and eat the rest of his kibble. He didn't care. He's like,
right.
it's food. I will consume this. There are some dogs, especially where like once they realize something is possible, I think that if this game's over, they're like, oh, like I could eat this forever, and I'm not eating it right now, and so it's just like you can't get them to go back. I
Yeah.
don't. It's I don't know. It's it'd be the equivalent of like trying to give kids like protein shakes forever and then giving them like real food, and they're like, oh, this is an option. We can do this. Like
Wait,
it's
this is,
game's
oh,
over.
yeah, right,
Yeah. And so, I mean, I will say that, we definitely, that's one of our advantages is that, it's the food is very palatable, not to hype themselves up, but
right.
going from like extruded dry kibble to like a whole food diet, it's a huge leap in palatability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely an advantage for pets who are picky. Um, but I do think that, it's important to still be regimented with anything. Like, even if you're feeding a palatable product, you want to make sure you're feeding the right amount of food. Because to your point, we have a lot of pets out there that are overweight. I think that the last stat that I looked at, published data, was like, I think 60% of pets are at least overweight. And I
Yeah.
believe, and I had to go back to the study, I think like 30 to 40% might be obese on that scale, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of overweight pets out there.
Yeah.
And part of that is just this nutritional literacy is very challenging. I also think it's a lot easier to overfeed a dry diet. Like there's a lot of data that say that like, okay, well, if you feed a very calorically dense product, it's easier to overeat it. Like we know this for a fact. Like you put a bowl of Cheetos in front of me and
Right.
like a whole gourd, like I would eat more Cheetos. It's just it's the way they're designed. It's the same thing with extruded dry products. Like and there's published data saying that's true. Like, hey, like, eating a calorically dense product, you will eat a net higher amount of calories, even though, yes, like there's data saying that at a certain point, you, besides like labs and golden retrievers, this little asterisk by them,
I was gonna say
like
I
everybody
live with
else,
one of
like,
those. I have
yeah,
a lab.
like everybody else, like that doesn't have a broken like satiety mechanism in their brain or whatever we did to them to make them not like stop eating. But everybody else like should at a certain point be like, I'm full and stop.
Right.
And it's so even with that mechanism, it's like it just there's a big difference in terms of like the amount of food they'll eat on a dry dehydrated product versus eating something that has all the moisture and all the other ingredients that kind of make it more satiating. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do try to explain to people calorie density and like the
yeah,
difference when that's being switched and to make sure. but also too the fact that like you can do all the equations in the world, they can be off by 50%. So you have to also look at like their body condition. You have to look at how many calories they're getting right now. What should their ideal weight be? Because so many people are like, well, he won't lose weight. I put him on weight management diet. I'm like, but are you feeding him to stay 50 pounds, or are you feeding him to be 30? Because if
Yeah.
you're giving him what he needs to be 50, well, yeah, even on a weight loss diet, he'll stay that, you know?
Yeah. It's
So,
like you make low calorie obstacles will still make you overweight. So it's,
you're
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But no, it's yeah. I think it's a lot easier for people to feed the right amount of food when it's more volume. I mean, that's just that, like if you're talking about like, if you look at like, I would do this with my own dog, when I went to feed from kibble to like just for dogs, even one of our more calorically dense products, it's a lot more food. Like I have an 80-pound greyhound now, you big boy. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh wow, like it's a lot of food that I'm feeding.
Uh-huh.
So it's I feel like it's a lot harder to overfeed when
Oh,
you have a whole food diet. That's me subjectively. I think that it's a study I'd love to do eventually. Basically, it's like, hey, like on average, how much more satiated are dogs who eat a whole food diet versus a kibble diet? Like it'd be a great study. Um,
is that something you can measure?
I think, well, I guess, yes. I think what you probably have to do is there's a couple of different, I like how I'm looking this like lightly.
Yeah.
One is that like the easiest way is apparently there's a protocol where you can measure how quickly they're eating
Mm.
food.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can gauge, okay, like they ate this amount of food, this amount of time. And you use basically like stats to say like, okay, they would have consumed this much food in a certain time period. And so
Mm-hmm.
you equate that to satiety. The other is like you could just give them food and then when they stop, obviously it's got to be slightly subjective. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
know, like imagine reading a protocol being like golden retrievers and labs were excluded from the
And
study because
beagles.
they won't stop eating.
Right.
So like I you have to praise with I don't know how you word that for publication, but you have to
Yeah.
take dogs that
We took out the goldfish of dogs and
like the ones that like just like would Scrooge McDuck vault eat like the entire thing.
right, exactly.
They would eat the entire thing and keep eating.
Right.
Yes, you do that, and then you would just measure like how much food did they eat. There are studies that do that that are like palatability studies where you like kind
Right.
of compare the different products, and you can see like how much of each they ate. I'm sure you could design a project along that lines to say like, hey, like which of these products is more satiating. And ideally, you would want to kind of make them as similar as possible. On that way, you're not like skewing the results by saying like, oh, like this one's like ultra high fat and high protein and like very like not a lot of fiber. This one's like calorically dilute and like I mean, kind of like try to like generate the results to be in your favor. But you could make a study that could signify that. And I don't know if it would necessarily be like the most novel idea because there's data from humans especially that says that like yes, like there have been plenty of studies in people saying like what they call ultra processed food, like shredded dry Cheetos and
Right. Sure.
stuff
Potato
like
chips.
that. Like you eat more food if you eat ultra processed diet. The terminology doesn't it does marry up to that met a little bit in the sense, but it's a slightly different intention. I would say that like a Cheeto versus a kibble is not the same intent, right? Like one
No,
is
because they are, yeah, you can have a complete and balanced kibble. Obviously, a Cheeto is not. So, yeah, I know you're not saying that at all, but
yeah, but like it's like the theme is there still. It's like so like you're taking a different application of nutrition and saying that like what is the difference in the actual benefit for the patient, like or the pet in this case. Like I technically don't have patients anymore, although I still use that term quite a bit because I'm treating
can't
people.
help it. It's
Yeah,
ingrained in you.
yeah. I still say client too or
Yeah.
owner, and like people are like owner. It seems really weird. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. This is the wrong context for that term
Right.
anymore. But it's a big part of like I'd say it's a little bit more of a tangent of our conversation, but for Just for Dogs, like part of the thesis of the company on a very scientific level is like, does the way you cook food and the type of ingredient you're using matter? And that isn't that big of a leap. You would think it like some people are really like apprehensive about a whole food diet, which I think is rather strange.
Hmm.
Like there's you encounter you events at like conferences, you think that um, that it's some sort of like gimmick or kind of some sort of boutique product. I'm like it's just food. It's still a balanced diet, and the really the intent is to say, okay, what is the benefit that you see from a different way of processing the food? Like there's a lot of food science and a lot of good kibble out there, I would say, in terms of like, there's definitely like a range of quality. I
Sure.
don't get the space as much as like some of my colleagues do, who like we even had people in the company that used to work for, they used to work for Dry Extruded Colors. And the range of quality is pretty broad. Where, you like, obviously there's different, the Mercedes, Audi and BMW. I'm sure you could fill in the blanket for
I'm
those.
already gotcha.
Yeah, they probably are. Like, there's a range of like acceptability and even like quality of the way you process food.
Hmm.
Um, and then you go to take that and you say, okay, well, we're gonna take ingredients that could be used in the human supply chain. So these are things that aren't like ground up into a fine powder and shipped, and then stored at a facility and then made into a batter, put through an extruder under heat and pressure. And instead, we're going to buy a chicken. We're going to buy ground beef. We're going to cook it in what amounts to being like a really large, kind of like steam kettle. You want to think of it that way?
Hmm.
It's basically like a
Pressure
giant,
cooker.
yeah, it's a giant drum basically. Yeah, like that
Uh-huh.
you like an agitator, and so in it there's a steam jacket that goes around the exterior of it that kind of heats up the turbine almost, and it kind of turns the agitates the food so it makes one homogeneous blend. So you don't want things to be evenly distributed, and it cooks it to a very set temperature. We set, like it's a very involved degree of food science engineering that goes in there, and we take all of that and we freeze it instead of making it into like a shelf stable dehydrated product,
Right.
and that keeps it stable. And so the attention is, okay, well, what benefit does that get your pet? I think definitely palatability, as I'm sure you've found, like out in fed animal foods, but
Yeah.
it's not hard to get dogs to eat the food, which is
Nope.
good. Pretty palatable. The other things that we really want to see are like, well, in the long term for the company, because we're still pretty new in the space, even being around since 2010, and talking about competing against companies for like the big giants in the industry have been around for almost 100 years at this point.
Right.
So like what can we do and how can we get benefit to pets? And so the things we're interested in are and things like, well, how does thermal processing affect nutrient quality? So it does affect digestibility. So that like if you cook the hell out of something, it's not going to be as digestible as if you kind of cooked it to the food safe temperature that doesn't exceed a certain threshold. Um, how does that? How does the quality of meat processing affect things like lifespan? Like does like having ultra processed food versus not improves longevity? There's new data coming out, and these projects that we're interested in looking at things like DNA methylation, which is
Hmm.
basically a biomarker of
Right.
longevity.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Hmm.
Are
Yeah.
you familiar with that? Cool. Yeah, it's a very cool topic. It allows you to study the effects of different like variables on aging in a short time frame, which is really valuable.
Right.
So obviously, lifetime studies are great, but they take a
They
while.
take a lifetime.
It's about to take a while. Uh, yeah, and then the other things that are in the long run for me too would be how do the way you process diets help disease state management? And
Right.
this is something that like I would say that this is in the like the lowest threshold of evidence right now, which is expert opinion. Like when I was out in practice, and you have patients who have like IBD, these like IBD, protein losing enteropathy, or vegetation dogs. There's something about like a homemade diet or a whole food diet that just seems to agree with them more.
Hmm.
And at the time, like I didn't have a lot of evidence to say like why that is. Like, so you take a diet on paper, like a very popular diet out there is like what they call STP, in the internal medicine world, which is sweet potato, tilapia, and pasta. And
Uh-huh.
they would basically it's an ultra low fat, novel protein diet
Hmm.
that's cooked at home. And there's, like you would make this diet and you would compare it to like a similar composition, something that's on the market, like a diet that's also low in fat, probably novel protein, it has highly digestible ingredients.
Uh-huh.
And there's just some dogs that just did so much better on the whole food diet. And it's like, well, why is that? Why is it different? Is it digestibility? Is it the different, metabolites that are formed and like things like advanced location end products or Maillard reactions that kind of change the chemical composition of the food and alter its digestibility or alter the way that the flora of the GI tract responds to it. Like there's so many different variables that we don't really, I would say, completely understand yet, but are very interesting and need to be investigated about like what are the big factors that affect the way that the food affects the individual. So I'm talking for a while. I mean, trying to ask questions. So
No, no, I just think it's really interesting just because of like all of those or so many of those specific things that you're talking about, so like IBD or like allergies or things like that, which are like a really inflammatory diseases, right? So how much of what we're seeing with food is that it becomes pro-inflammatory depending on how it's processed.
yeah,
So you know what I'm saying? And I mean, I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I personally know like just like how important it is to make sure that you eat properly and things like that really
yeah,
does affect you as a human, right?
yeah,
Human animal. So it does actually make logical sense. And I'm not saying I know why, but
yeah,
why it makes sense for those things to ring true for our animals as well.
yeah.
And I feel like we had somebody on not that long ago that does like epigenetics
Oh,
in animals, and it was like basically collecting DNA samples and actually looking at how nutrition affects things on that tiny of a level in DNA, turning on and turning off of certain genes and things like that. So that's why I was like, it is really very interesting. I know that that's one of the things that she's looking at is to like maybe work with food companies and stuff like that to see, hey, is this really happening at this like genetic level?
yeah. Who's the researcher? I'm curious.
Her name's Andrea Beal. She works for EpiPause, and they do she got her PhD in aging. Like basically, she would figure out that based on epigenetics, she could age sharks and dolphins, and then she translated it into animals. And so that's where this like the product she has is. So it helps you like so if you've rescued a dog and you've no idea how old they are, you can send it in, and within a year, she can tell you how old he is based on their epigenetics. But the goal eventually is to use that to try to see if we can intervene in like health before diseases become the disease process just by seeing how the genetics changes and like what their genetic age is versus their like actual age. It's very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, the that stuff is so cool to me. Like I feel like I didn't hear anything about that for the longest time. And then like all of a sudden it just became like very common in like the research space. Like there was a documentary on Netflix recently. I was looking at like vegan versus like omnivore
With
diets.
twins, right? Wasn't it
This was
twins?
study.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then like DNA methylation. I was like, what? What? I never like I enjoyed the company and like there's members of the company that were really interested in aging.
Uh-huh.
And so we I wouldn't say that we have nothing really to comment on yet, but it's a very interesting topic for the company. Because I think that the goal is to say like, well, what can you do to improve lifespan? And if part of that is saying that the type of food you eat affects that, then knowing like, well, on a broader level, like you have these kind of like very broad topics, which is like, okay, you can say whole food and human grade. On a molecular level, what does that mean? Like I can talk about like the quality of ingredients and like what it means from a processing standpoint. And I can say that like from my experience, it does influence patients, not every single one. Like obviously there's plenty of dogs out there that can eat kibble and they don't explode. Like they're doing fine.
Yeah, they do great. Yeah.
But
Mhm.
yeah, but it's like what improves when you feed a higher quality food? Like can you and there's different levels of that, right? Which is like, okay, like, well, are you more likely, which I would say the answer is most likely, like 99% yes. Are you less likely to be obese or overweight when you eat a whole food diet versus eating a dry kibble? I'm going to go with, and then that obviously we know like affects your genetic makeup. Like, being obese is pro-inflammatory.
Right.
It can cause a lot of that changes to your DNA, methylation status, other like biomarkers of biologic or genetic age. There's all these different layers of it, but like I still wonder, like, I think that a big topic for me for this company is what can we do to be better with the quality of nutrition? And like, is if using a human grade whole food diet is the way we can achieve that, then we can at least give people the option to say, hey, like there is a way to feed beyond an extruded dry diet or canned food, and they can
Mm-hmm.
provide quality nutrition. And does that give you, like hopefully we can quantify better, like why it's better, like in the
Right.
long run.
Right. Yeah.
That will take time and research, obviously, to kind of
Yeah.
substantiate, like, okay, macro stuff, like, you do studies like DNA methylation and say, yes, like this or did or did not improve the DNA of that. And then further from that is why, like, is there something like on a molecular basis that you could substantiate to say, is it the amount of like Meyer reaction products, advanced glycation products, and some sort of other metabolite? Does it affect the microbiome? Like, what is it that changes? There's yeah, we could obviously blather about a lot of research. I could talk to you up about
Well,
that.
but that's the other word that like I don't think I heard ever. And now it's everybody knows about biome. Everybody's like trying to keep it happy. And you know what I'm saying? Like
Hard topic too. Like when you listen to biome lectures, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, there's always something new, and it's like, is this usable? They're like, it's cool. I understand it's shiny, but can I use it yet? And they're like, no, no, that's
I
so
think I think there's something to the openness. There's something whenever there's a paradigm shift, it really takes time. Like, right? Like, so in the beginning, people always tell you you're crazy. That doesn't make sense. And then people start to adopt it, and then eventually they say, "How did we not like?" We've always known this. This is great, you know. So there is a paradigm shift, and at least people are open to it. And
yeah,
now it is something that's accessible, and I think that is um like one of the major benefits, right? Because people can formulate their own diets, but not everybody has time to do it.
right.
And there is some variability when people start to make their own diets too. Like it's hard to keep it consistent for a long period of time. So it's nice that there's this option.
Yeah, it's definitely like the biggest limitation of homemade diets is that it's they call it nutrient drift. Basically, it's like, okay, like does the client actually like following instructions when they make the diet?
Mm-hmm.
You can make a lot of like arguments about like, okay, well, like for otherwise healthy fat, you can kind of move the needle back and forth a little bit. It's probably not going to be like it's not going to by any means cause significant harm, but especially for like long term stability for the diet, like yeah, like if you can make a product that had meat or exceed that from and feed it continually, you don't have to worry as much about like deficiencies. Like I feel like in vet med we have the luxury that any pet that's on like a commercial diet for the most part, like we don't have to worry about like, oh, are they vitamin deficient?
Right.
It's like they're eating balanced diet, probably not.
Right.
Like unless they went really wrong, you get to like rest a little easily and kind of like cross a lot of stuff off your list that like for like an unbalanced product you have to start worrying about. Like, oh well, are they deficient in something? How
Mm-hmm.
long have they not been getting calcium? Is the risk of a pathologic fracture there now? Like, there's so many layers of doubt that you encounter that feeding a diet where you maintain it, you test it, you surveil it, you make sure that it is indeed hitting the targets that you're setting is very valuable in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, you can make your own homemade diet, and there's lots of people that do it very well. I would say that the majority of people probably don't want to do that. There are
Well,
some that do.
when you teach them how they have to do it, like
Yeah,
I use my cheat sheet. I always tell people go to balance it. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie, because
yeah,
I couldn't tell you how to do it. I'm like, go, that's what you got to do. And but once they start doing it, they're like, oh, there's a lot to this, like
yeah.
doing it in a balanced way,
Yeah, it's like cooking is not like also not everyone's forte. I mean, like I love cooking, but I think that if I told some of my friends like, oh, you need to cook your dog's food, and that they would look at me like I was crazy. And that was definitely our hurdle for clinics was like, hey, there's some cases where like there wasn't a product off market that
Right.
fit the pet. And so in that case, a homemade diet is really your only realistic option. You can
Mm-hmm.
make something that's bespoke to the individual. We actually selfishly a small player. We do have a custom diet service that we actually can make homemade diet, like well, industrial produce homemade diets that aren't on our product line.
Mm-hmm.
It's a definitely a very attractive service in that sense. But I would say that overall, that similarly back to the need for kind of like rigidity and control, it's just that like you not rigidity, it's the wrong word, but kind of more tight regulation on
Consistency.
consistency is a better word. Thank you very much. That one. It's that you just don't have to worry as much about, you
Right.
know, efficiency and quality. That there's people that are working very diligently to make a quality product for you. And it makes you able to rest much easier. Also, it's less labor when you just go buy it. Just
Right.
very convenient. So,
Right, right. Which everyone's lives are crazy. There's a lot going on, and I mean, so I really appreciate like you explaining what it takes to get there and sort of like what it looks like and how much goes into it, because then I think people get a real appreciation of what what it takes to make a really good diet. And like I said, the expertise. And I probably could just talk to you the entire day, but because it's such an interesting topic, and I really appreciate you coming on and like just going through all this and taking your time because I find it fascinating. So I'm very appreciative of all the time that you've given me today.
I appreciate you having me on. It's are we that sounds like we're wrapping up then by the sound of it. So
Yeah.
yeah. Hey, but
Well,
the rest,
like I was going to say, I mean, we usually try to keep it, pretty tight, but
hey, no, it's okay. I just
it's
want to make
so
sure like I'm
it's
not
just so
watching the clock. So
interesting to me. You know what I mean? Like just everything that you've kind of shared with us and everything. So so I really really appreciate it. And if people sometimes will send us questions after, so
okay.
if we get any questions, I'll hopefully you won't mind if I
Yeah, no, you can just forward it to me. That's fine.
bug
Yeah.
you. But that is at podcast@mybalto.com. And this has been the Posit Podcast. Thanks everybody for listening.